A billionaire CEO's busy workday is interrupted by a phone call from a notary. "Hi sir, you have been named in a legal guardianship case." Initially dismissing it as a mistake, he freezes in shock when the notary mentions who the mother is. James Adams sat at the head of the long, glass-topped conference table, the weight of the room's attention firmly on him. He thrived in moments like these, commanding the room with his razor-sharp insights and a confidence born from years of unparalleled success. His voice, even and controlled, echoed across the sleek corporate boardroom as he outlined the next quarter's strategy for Adams Enterprises. To the world, James was a titan, a self-made billionaire who had built an empire from nothing, a man who didn't flinch under pressure. His assistant, Monica, entered quietly, her heels clicking softly against the marble floor. She hovered near his chair, a faint look of hesitation on her face. It was rare for anyone to interrupt him during a meeting, let alone Monica, who prided herself on her near telepathic ability to gauge when it was safe to approach. "Mr. Adams," she said in a low voice, leaning toward him. "There's an urgent call you need to take." "A notary." James glanced at her, irritation flashing in his dark eyes. "It can wait," he replied, his tone clipped. Monica hesitated. "I was told it's regarding a personal matter." James's brow furrowed. Personal? The word felt almost foreign to him. Work had consumed so much of his life that anything outside of it barely registered as important. With a sigh, he stood, gesturing for the team to continue their discussion without him. Monica followed him out into the corridor, handing him his phone. "Adams," he answered curtly. "Mr. Adams, this is Henry Allen, a notary from Grayson and Associates," came the voice on the other end, formal but tinged with urgency. "I'm reaching out regarding a matter that requires your immediate attention. You've been named in a legal guardianship case." James's stride slowed, his free hand instinctively tugging at the knot of his tie. "I think you have the wrong person. I don't have any involvement in guardianship cases." "No, sir," Henry insisted. "There's no mistake. You've been named as the legal guardian for Ava and Liam Laney, the 8-year-old twins of Ms. Charlotte Laney." The name hit James like a punch to the gut, stirring a memory he hadn't revisited in years. Charlotte Laney. The notary's voice continued, but James barely heard him, his mind momentarily adrift. "Mr. Adams?" Henry's voice cut through the haze. James cleared his throat, masking his unease. "Why would Charlotte Laney name me as their guardian? I haven't seen her in..." He paused, doing the math. "Years." "I can't speak to her reasons, sir. Ms. Laney's will specifies you explicitly. The twins are currently in temporary foster care, but arrangements need to be made for their permanent placement." James's fingers tightened around the phone. The last time he'd seen Charlotte, they were barely out of college. She had been warm, vibrant, and endlessly kind, a stark contrast to his own relentless drive. They drifted apart as his career took off, and he hadn't heard from her since. Now, years later, she was gone, leaving behind 2 children and his name scrawled in her will. "This doesn't make sense," James said, his voice quieter now. I'm not equipped for something like this." "I understand this is unexpected," Henry replied gently. "But the legal documents are clear. Ms. Laney's wishes were explicit. I'll send over the paperwork for you to review. In the meantime, I suggest meeting the children. They're staying with a foster family in the city." James ended the call without another word, his mind racing. For a man who thrived on control, the chaos of the moment was unsettling. He stood in the quiet corridor, the hum of the office around him muted by his thoughts. Monica, who had been waiting a respectful distance away, approached him cautiously. "Is everything all right?" He looked at her, his expression unreadable. "Cancel my afternoon meetings. I need some time." He retreated to his office, closing the door behind him. The space, designed to reflect his meticulously ordered life, now felt stifling. He sank into his leather chair, his gaze drifting to the city skyline beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. Charlotte Laney. How could she have entrusted him with something so monumental? He barely knew her anymore, and the idea of raising 2 children felt utterly alien. His life was a carefully orchestrated symphony of business deals and strategy meetings, with no room for the chaos of parenthood. Yet, as he sat there, fragments of the past began to surface. He remembered Charlotte's infectious laugh, the way she could light up a room without trying. They'd once been close, closer than he cared to admit, but their lives had veered in opposite directions. What had happened to her? And why had she chosen him? He pulled up his laptop and began searching for answers. A quick online search brought up an obituary. Charlotte Laney, age 34, had died in a car accident 2 weeks ago. The twins, Ava and Liam, were listed as her surviving family. There was no mention of a father. James stared at the screen, a weight settling in his chest. He didn't do grief. He didn't do family. But here he was, thrust into the center of both. The intercom on his desk buzzed, breaking his reverie. Monica's voice came through. "Mr. Adams, your driver is ready whenever you are." James hesitated before responding. "Thank you, Monica." He stood, smoothing his tie and straightening his jacket. If he was going to face this, he would do it on his terms. He didn't know what he'd find when he met those kids, but one thing was certain: his life had just been turned upside down, and there was no turning back. James adjusted his cufflinks in the back seat of the sleek black town car, the hum of the city muffled by the thick glass windows. The driver navigated through late afternoon traffic while James stared blankly at the file in his lap. The notary had sent over the details, an overview of Charlotte's will, legal documents, and a sparse dossier on the twins, Ava and Liam. Their photos stared back at him, a boy with messy brown hair and a mischievous grin, and a girl with solemn eyes that seemed far older than her years. James closed the file, leaned back, and exhaled deeply. His life thrived on predictability and control. Now, a woman he hadn't spoken to in over a decade had thrust him into an emotional labyrinth he wasn't prepared for. He turned to the driver. "Take me home instead," he said abruptly. "I need to think." The car made a smooth U-turn, and 20 minutes later, James was stepping into his penthouse apartment, a sprawling space of glass, steel, and needed luxury. He poured himself a scotch and settled onto the couch, the city skyline stretching before him. The photos of the twins haunted him, their young faces a constant reminder of the upheaval Charlotte had orchestrated with a single legal document. He powered up his laptop and typed her name into the search bar, hoping to piece together the life she'd led since they'd parted ways. News articles about the accident filled the first page. Local teacher Charlotte Laney dies in tragic crash. A few clicks revealed more. She had been a beloved elementary school teacher, active in her community, known for her kindness and dedication to her students. The twins had been in the car with her but miraculously survived with only minor injuries. James's stomach tightened at the thought of them losing their mother so suddenly, left to navigate a world without the person who had been their everything. He scrolled further, stumbling upon a small blog post written by one of Charlotte's colleagues. It mentioned her struggles as a single mother, and how she always seemed to find joy in the little things, even when life was hard. There was no mention of extended family, no one else who might have stepped in to take care of the children. The more he read, the heavier the guilt weighed on him. He'd barely thought about Charlotte over the years, too consumed by his ambition. Yet she had thought of him, not just once, but enough to entrust her children to him. Why? What had she seen in him that he couldn't even see in himself? James shut the laptop and leaned back, letting the memories flood in. He and Charlotte had met during his first year of college. She was different from anyone he'd ever known, warm, spontaneous, and fiercely independent. While he buried himself in books and part-time jobs to fund his education, she lived fully, pulling him into her orbit with a mix of charm and determination. Their romance had been brief but intense. She'd wanted more from him, more time, more commitment, but he'd been too focused on his future. The last time they'd spoken, she'd accused him of caring more about success than about people. And she hadn't been wrong. He stared out at the city lights, feeling the hollowness of his accomplishments pressing against him. His wealth, his influence, none of it could help him understand why Charlotte had chosen him. The next morning, James arrived at the notary's office. Henry Allen, a thin man in a crisp suit, greeted him warmly and guided him to a private conference room. A thick envelope sat waiting on the table. "I assume you've had a chance to review the initial paperwork?" Henry asked. "I have," James replied, his tone as even as he could manage. "But I need to know more." "Why me? Why would Charlotte trust me with this?" Henry adjusted his glasses, his expression sympathetic. "Ms. Laney didn't leave a detailed explanation, but she spoke of you fondly. She said you were someone who knew how to rise to a challenge, someone she could rely on, even if you didn't know it yourself." The words hit James harder than he'd expected. He sat back, processing them, as Henry slid the envelope across the table. "There's a letter inside," Henry said softly. "It's addressed to you." James hesitated before picking it up, his fingers brushing over the neat handwriting on the front. Charlotte's name stared back at him, a final echo of a voice he hadn't heard in years. He unfolded the paper and began to read. "Dear James, if you're reading this, then I'm not there to explain myself, and for that I'm sorry. I know this is asking a lot of you, maybe too much, but I had no one else. My parents passed away years ago, and the twins' father, well, he's not in the picture. I needed someone who could give them stability, someone who would fight for them the way I always tried to. And I thought of you. You might not see it, but you're a good man, James. You always have been. Beneath all the ambition and drive, there's a heart that cares deeply, even if you don't let it show. I saw it back then, and I believe it's still there now. Please take care of Ava and Liam. They're my whole world. And if you let them, they might just become yours too. With love, Charlotte." James's throat tightened as he folded the letter, placing it carefully back into the envelope. Henry gave him a moment of silence before speaking again. "You're under no legal obligation to accept guardianship," Henry said gently. "But if you do, the children will need to be placed with you soon. Foster care is only a temporary arrangement." James nodded, his mind swirling. He left the notary's office and walked out onto the busy street, the city buzzing around him. He could feel the weight of Charlotte's words pulling him in opposite directions, her trust a source of both validation and crushing responsibility. Back at his penthouse, he opened the file again, staring at the photos of Ava and Liam. He didn't know if he could be what they needed, but one thing was clear: Charlotte had believed in him when no one else had. For the first time in years, James felt something he couldn't explain. It wasn't just guilt or confusion, it was the faintest glimmer of resolve, a small voice in the back of his mind whispering, "You owe her this." And as he sat there, his phone buzzed with a reminder. The twins were waiting. The drive to the foster home was long and silent, leaving James alone with his thoughts. The letter from Charlotte replayed in his mind, her words weighing on him more heavily with each passing mile. He wasn't the man she remembered, the man she believed in. That part of him had been buried beneath years of board meetings, acquisition deals, and late nights alone in his penthouse. Now, two children, two strangers, were about to pull him into a life he had never envisioned for himself. When the car finally stopped in front of a modest suburban house, James hesitated before stepping out. A foster care liaison greeted him at the door, her smile polite but cautious, as if she wasn't sure how to approach the billionaire CEO who had suddenly appeared in her world. "They're in the living room," she said, leading him inside. "They've been adjusting, but it's been hard. I'll give you some time." James stepped into the small, cozy living room and immediately spotted them. Ava sat on the couch, her legs tucked beneath her, clutching a worn stuffed rabbit. Her dark eyes fixed on him, unblinking, with a mix of curiosity and suspicion. Liam, sprawled out on the floor with a pile of action figures, barely glanced up. His hair was unkempt, his expression defiant. "Hi," James said, his voice stiff. He wasn't used to introducing himself without a title or a handshake. "I'm James. I knew your mom." Silence hung heavy in the room. Ava looked him over, her gaze sharp and assessing, while Liam returned to his toys, muttering something under his breath that James couldn't make out. "Why are you here?" Ava finally asked, her tone direct and unwavering. James swallowed. He had anticipated this question but still didn't have an answer that felt right. "Your mom asked me to look after you," he said. "She trusted me." Ava's eyes narrowed. "She didn't tell us about you." Liam snorted. "Maybe because she didn't think you'd show up." The boy's words stung more than James expected. He cleared his throat, unsure how to respond. He had faced down ruthless competitors and skeptical investors, but nothing in his life had prepared him for this kind of interrogation. "I know this is hard," James said, choosing his words carefully. "And I don't expect you to trust me right away. But I'm here to help." Liam shot him a glare. "We don't need your help." Ava remained silent, her grip tightening on the stuffed rabbit. James could see the grief etched into their young faces, the raw pain they were struggling to mask with anger and distance. He felt a pang of something unfamiliar, guilt, perhaps, or maybe just the overwhelming sense that he was in way over his head. The liaison returned, sensing the tension in the room. "Why don't we give them some time to settle in?" she suggested gently. "You can come back tomorrow to finalize the arrangements." James nodded, relieved to have an exit. As he left, he couldn't shake the image of Ava's piercing gaze or the bitterness in Liam's voice. Charlotte had seen something in him, but the twins clearly didn't. And maybe they were right. The next day, James made arrangements to bring the twins to his home. He didn't handle the logistics himself. His assistant, Monica, took care of it. A car brought Ava and Liam to his penthouse, where a team of staff members waited to help them settle in. James had ordered everything they could possibly need: new clothes, toys, books, even a custom playroom stocked with the latest gadgets. He had approached the situation the same way he approached a new business acquisition: identify the needs, allocate resources, and execute a plan. But as soon as the twins arrived, it became clear that no amount of material comfort could bridge the gap between them. "This place is too big," Liam muttered as they entered the sprawling penthouse. "It's weird." "It's not weird," Ava corrected, her tone flat. "It's cold." James, who had been waiting by the floor-to-ceiling windows, turned to face them. "If there's anything you need, let me know." "I've made arrangements for. We don't need anything from you," Ava interrupted, her voice sharp. "We just want to go home." James paused, unsure how to respond. He had spent his entire career making decisions that affected thousands of people, but this was different. These were two grieving children, and his usual tactics of efficiency and problem-solving felt completely inadequate. Despite his best intentions, things only got worse. James had hired a nanny, a well-credentialed woman named Margaret, to handle the day-to-day care of the twins. But Ava and Liam weren't interested in Margaret's carefully planned schedules or her soothing attempts to engage them. They ignored her, retreating to their shared bedroom and refusing to come out except for meals. James tried to focus on work, retreating to his home office for conference calls and emails. But the tension in the penthouse was impossible to ignore. Ava and Liam's presence disrupted the orderly rhythm of his life. Their grief seeped into every corner of the apartment, a constant reminder that he had no idea what he was doing. One evening, James returned from a late meeting to find the twins arguing with Margaret in the living room. Liam was in tears, clutching an action figure, while Ava stood in front of him like a protective shield. "I said no!" Ava shouted at Margaret. "You can't take his stuff away." "I wasn't taking it away," Margaret replied, exasperated. "I was just trying to tidy up." "Leave us alone!" Liam cried, his voice breaking. James stepped in, his tone firm. "What's going on here?" Margaret turned to him, flustered. "They've been refusing to follow the rules all day." "I was just trying to keep things organized, and they enough," James said, cutting her off. He looked at Ava and Liam, their faces red and tear-streaked. "Go to your room. We'll talk about this later." Ava glared at him but didn't argue. She grabbed Liam's hand and led him down the hall, slamming the door behind them. Margaret sighed, muttering something about children needing discipline before gathering her things and leaving for the night. James sank onto the couch, rubbing his temples. He had thought he could delegate this, hire the right people, provide the right resources, and everything would fall into place. But it wasn't working. The twins didn't need another nanny or a penthouse full of toys. They needed something he wasn't sure he could give. For the first time in years, James felt powerless. Charlotte had believed in him, but as he sat alone in the empty living room, he couldn't help but wonder if she had been wrong. He didn't know how to connect with Ava and Liam. He didn't know how to fix this. But something deep inside him told him he had to try. James was used to challenges. He thrived on solving problems, orchestrating billion-dollar deals, and bringing chaos into order. But Ava and Liam were unlike any problem he had faced before. They didn't follow logic or reason. They were unpredictable, stubborn, and clearly intent on testing his limits. The days following the incident with Margaret weren't much better. Ava maintained a steely distance, her sharp eyes tracking him with silent judgment. Liam, on the other hand, alternated between sulking in their room and making his displeasure known in ways James hadn't anticipated. A carefully curated vase shattered when Liam's soccer ball, accidentally, hit it. A mountain of spilled cereal ruined the custom silk rug in the dining area. James clenched his jaw and cleaned up the messes, all while trying to keep his life on track. But his patience frayed further when Ava and Liam disrupted something far more important: his work. One evening, James hosted a dinner at his penthouse for several high-profile clients. The stakes were high, a potential partnership that could lead to the largest expansion Adams Enterprises had ever undertaken. He prepared meticulously, ensuring every detail was perfect, from the imported wine selection to the catered three-course meal. As the guests arrived, James reminded Monica, who had stayed late to help manage the evening, to keep the twins occupied in their wing of the penthouse. She assured him everything was under control. Except it wasn't. Midway through the main course, just as James was beginning to outline his vision for the partnership, Liam burst into the dining room, dragging a stuffed dragon behind him. "Why don't you ever eat with us?" Liam demanded, his small voice cutting through the polite hum of conversation. James froze, the room falling silent as the assembled executives turned their curious gazes toward him. He forced a tight smile. "Liam, this isn't the time, and why does this food look so weird?" Liam continued, wrinkling his nose at the elegant plates of duck confit. "Do you even like it?" "Liam, enough," James said, his voice sharper now. He stood, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder, but Liam twisted away and bolted out of the room. Ava appeared in the doorway moments later, her arms crossed and a defiant look on her face. "Maybe if you actually talked to us instead of hiding with your boring friends, we wouldn't have to come find you." "Ava," James began, but she was already gone, her footsteps echoing down the hall. He turned back to the table, the humiliation burning in his chest. "My apologies," he said tersely. "Children can be unpredictable." The clients smiled politely, though their expressions ranged from bemused to uncomfortable. The dinner continued, but the mood had shifted. By the time the guests left, James was seething. He stormed to the twins' room, where he found Ava reading and Liam sulking in bed. "What were you thinking, barging in like that?" he demanded. Ava didn't even look up from her book. "You mean, what were we thinking, wanting to spend time with the person who's supposed to take care of us?" "That dinner was important," James snapped. "I needed to focus, and you care more about your stupid work than us." Liam muttered, his voice trembling. "You say Mom said you'd take care of us, but you don't even like us." James's breath caught. He opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came out. Ava closed her book with a decisive snap and glared at him. "You don't have to pretend you care. We know you don't. Just leave us alone." James left the room, their words echoing in his mind. He poured himself a drink and sat in the dimly lit living room, staring at the city lights but seeing nothing. The next morning, a package arrived. Monica brought it to him, her brow furrowed. "It's from the notary's office," she said, setting the small, padded envelope on his desk. James opened it hesitantly, pulling out a neatly folded letter. His heart sank as he recognized the familiar handwriting. Another letter from Charlotte. Dear James, if you're reading this, I hope it means you've started to find your way with Ava and Liam. I know they can be a handful. They're smart, stubborn, and full of life, everything I ever wanted them to be. But I also know they've been through something no child should ever have to endure. You're probably wondering why I chose you. I know you think it was because I had no one else, and it's true that my family is gone and the twins' father isn't in the picture. But that's not the whole story. I chose you because I knew you'd rise to the challenge. You always have, James. Even when we were younger, I saw in you a determination to do what was right, even when it scared you. I saw kindness beneath all your ambition, a heart that cared deeply, even if you didn't let people see it. You inspired me back then, and I believe in you now. You don't have to be perfect. Just be present. That's all they need. They don't need the CEO of Adams Enterprises. They need James, the boy who sat with me in the library for hours when I needed a friend, the man who fought for everything he wanted and never gave up. Please don't give up on them. They need you, even if they don't show it right now. And I believe you need them too. With love, Charlotte. James read the letter twice, then a third time, his chest tightening with each word. Charlotte had seen something in him that he had long since buried, a part of himself he wasn't sure even existed anymore. He folded the letter carefully and placed it on his desk. For the first time since the twins had entered his life, he felt the faint stirrings of something other than frustration or guilt. He didn't know how to be the man Charlotte believed he could be. But maybe, just maybe, he could try. James sat at his desk long after reading Charlotte's letter, her words lingering in his mind. She had believed in him, not just as a last resort, but as someone who could truly step up for Ava and Liam. It was a belief that both inspired and terrified him. He glanced at the folded letter on the desk, then at the photos of the twins he'd been sent weeks ago. They weren't just Charlotte's children. They were two people waiting for someone to show them they mattered. The next morning, James made a decision. No more delegating, no more distancing himself from the twins. If Charlotte had trusted him with this, he owed it to her, and to Ava and Liam, to try. When the twins emerged for breakfast, their moods were as frosty as ever. Ava poured herself a glass of orange juice without a word, while Liam toyed with a piece of toast, his eyes glued to the table. James cleared his throat, unsure how to begin. I thought maybe we could do something together today, he said, his voice tentative. Ava's eyebrows shot up in surprise, though she quickly masked it with a skeptical look. Like what? James hesitated. He had spent hours the night before researching activities kids might enjoy, but now that he was faced with them, none of his ideas seemed right. I thought we could go to the park. Maybe grab some ice cream after. Liam glanced at Ava, as if seeking her opinion. She shrugged, her expression unreadable. Whatever, she said. James took that as a tentative yes. At the park, James quickly realized just how out of his depth he was. Liam raced toward the playground without hesitation, climbing the jungle gym and sliding down the slides with an energy that left James winded just watching him. Ava, on the other hand, hung back, sitting on a bench with her arms crossed. You don't want to play? James asked, taking a seat beside her. I'm not a little kid, she replied, her tone clipped. James nodded, unsure how to respond. He glanced around the park, searching for something that might spark her interest. A group of teenagers were playing basketball on a nearby court, their laughter and shouts filling the air. Do you like basketball? He asked. Ava's eyes flicked toward the court before she shrugged. Mom used to play with us sometimes, she said quietly. James seized the opportunity. I'm not much of a basketball player, but if you want, I could try. Ava looked at him like he just suggested skydiving without a parachute. You'd play? In front of all these people? James smiled, surprising himself. Why not? I'm not afraid to embarrass myself. That got a small, reluctant smile from Ava. You will embarrass yourself, she said. You're in a suit. James laughed. Then it's a good thing I brought a change of clothes. By the time they left the park, Liam was grinning ear to ear, clutching a small stuffed animal James had won for him at a nearby arcade. Ava was quieter, but there was a softness in her expression that hadn't been there before. As they sat on a bench eating ice cream, Liam turned to James. Did Mom really know you? James paused, caught off guard by the question. Yes, he said. We knew each other a long time ago. What was she like? Liam asked, his voice small. Before we were born? James hesitated, unsure how much to share. But then he thought of Charlotte's letter, of the trust she'd placed in him to be honest with her children. She was incredible, he said. She was smart and kind and funny. And she cared about people, more than anyone I've ever known. Liam nodded, satisfied, but Ava's gaze lingered on James. If she was so great, why didn't you stay in touch? The question hit James like a punch to the gut. I don't know, he admitted. I let life get in the way. And that was a mistake. One I regret every day. For the first time, Ava seemed to soften toward him. She didn't say anything, but the way she looked at him felt less guarded, as though she was beginning to see him as more than just an interloper in their lives. Over the next few weeks, James made a concerted effort to be present. He learned that Liam loved dinosaurs and had an encyclopedic knowledge of every species. They spent hours at the Natural History Museum, where Liam excitedly pointed out every exhibit while James struggled to keep up. Ava was more reserved, but James discovered that she loved to draw. One evening, he found her sketching at the dining table, a series of intricate portraits spread out before her. He sat down across from her, watching in awe as her pencil danced across the page. These are amazing, he said, genuinely impressed. Did your mom teach you? Ava nodded. She used to draw with me all the time. She said it helped her relax. James smiled. She was right. I used to draw too a long time ago. Ava looked up, surprised. You? What did you draw? Mostly doodles, James admitted. But when I was a kid, I used to dream of being an architect. I loved sketching buildings. Ava tilted her head, studying him. You should try it again. James laughed. I don't think I'd be very good. Neither were you at basketball. She pointed out with a small smirk. But you still tried. It was a light-hearted comment, but it struck a chord with James. Charlotte had chosen him because she believed he could try, not just to be a guardian, but to be someone who mattered to Ava and Liam. And for the first time, he started to believe it too. The twins weren't the only ones changing. James found himself looking forward to their time together, their laughter, and even their bickering filling the once quiet penthouse with life. Slowly but surely, the cold walls of his carefully constructed world began to thaw, replaced by something he hadn't felt in years: warmth. One evening, as he tucked Liam into bed, the boy reached out and grabbed his hand. You're not so bad. Liam mumbled sleepily. James's chest tightened. Thanks, buddy. That means a lot. In the next room, Ava sat cross-legged on her bed, sketching. She looked up as James knocked on the doorframe. Good night, he said. Good night, she replied, her voice softer than usual. As James walked back to his room, he realized something profound. He wasn't just fulfilling a promise to Charlotte. He was becoming part of something bigger than himself. And for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. James's mornings had started to look different. Instead of rushing out the door to his office or burying himself in emails, he now spent time with Ava and Liam. Breakfast had become a shared ritual, with Liam chatting animatedly about dinosaurs and Ava offering quiet but thoughtful comments. The silence that once hung heavy over the penthouse had been replaced by the hum of family life. It wasn't perfect, far from it, but it was progress. James found himself smiling more, laughing even. He was learning, slowly but surely, how to be present for the twins. He was beginning to understand their quirks and rhythms, how Ava hid her emotions behind a wall of sarcasm, and how Liam's boundless energy masked his underlying fears. The twins, too, seemed to be warming to him. Ava's smiles were still rare but genuine when they appeared, and Liam had started following James around like a shadow. For the first time since their arrival, James felt like they might actually become a family. That fragile sense of peace shattered one afternoon when Monica walked into his office, her expression grim. "There's something you need to see," she said, placing a legal envelope on his desk. "It's about the twins." James opened the envelope, his stomach tightening as he scanned the document inside. It was a formal notice of a custody claim, filed by a man named Robert Laney. According to the document, Robert was a distant cousin of Charlotte's, and he was challenging her will, claiming he was better suited to care for Ava and Liam. James's chest tightened. "Who is this guy?" he asked, his voice sharper than he intended. Monica hesitated. "From what I've found, he's a small-time contractor in upstate New York. He's claiming that as their biological relative, he has a stronger legal claim than you." James's grip on the document tightened. "Does he even know them?" "No," Monica said. "There's no record of him being involved in their lives. But the courts might take his claim seriously because of the blood relation." James leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. Things had been going well, or at least as well as they could be under the circumstances. Now, this stranger was threatening to undo everything. That evening, James couldn't hide his frustration. At dinner, he barely touched his food, his thoughts consumed by the legal battle that loomed ahead. Ava and Liam noticed, their eyes darting between him and each other. "Are you mad at us?" Liam asked hesitantly, breaking the silence. James blinked, startled by the question. "What? No, of course not. Then why do you look like someone stole your company?" Ava said, her tone wary but probing. James hesitated. He didn't want to burden them with the details, but he also knew he couldn't lie. "It's nothing you need to worry about," he said finally. "Just some grown-up stuff." Ava didn't look convinced, but she didn't push further. Liam, however, seemed uneasy, his small hands fidgeting with the edge of his napkin. Later that night, after the twins had gone to bed, James found himself pacing the living room. The thought of someone like Robert Laney taking Ava and Liam away was unbearable. But as much as James hated the idea, doubts began to creep in. Was he really what the twins needed? Robert, as much of a stranger as he seemed, had at least one thing James didn't: a biological connection. Maybe the courts would see that as more important. Maybe the twins would be better off with someone who shared their family tree, someone who might feel an obligation that went deeper than James's promise to Charlotte. He rubbed his temples, frustrated with his own thoughts. Charlotte had chosen him for a reason. But what if she'd been wrong? Unbeknownst to James, Ava and Liam were awake, standing just outside the hallway that led to their rooms. They'd heard enough of his pacing and muttering to know something was wrong, and Ava had decided to investigate. She'd quietly led Liam to the edge of the hallway, where they now stood, listening. "I don't know if I can do this," James said aloud, his voice low but heavy with doubt. "Maybe they'd be better off with someone else." The words hit Ava like a slap. She grabbed Liam's hand and pulled him back toward their rooms, her face pale and her jaw clenched. Liam didn't say a word, but his eyes filled with tears as he followed her. The next morning, James noticed the shift immediately. The twins were quieter, their walls back up. Liam barely looked at him during breakfast, and Ava's responses were clipped and distant. It was as if all the progress they'd made had vanished overnight. "Is something wrong?" James asked, looking between them. "Nope," Ava said curtly, not meeting his eyes. Liam said nothing, his small shoulders hunched as he stared at his cereal. James felt a pang of guilt but didn't know how to bridge the sudden gap. He spent the day distracted, replaying his conversation with Monica and the doubts that had plagued him. By the time evening came, he couldn't take the tension anymore. He knocked softly on Ava's door and waited for her muffled, "Come in," before stepping inside. She was sitting on her bed, sketchbook in her lap, but she didn't look up. "Can we talk?" James asked. "About what?" she said, her tone cold. James hesitated. About whatever's bothering you. Ava finally looked up, her eyes hard. We heard you last night, she said bluntly. You don't want us here. James's heart sank. Ava, that's not true. Don't lie, she snapped. We heard you say we'd be better off with someone else. So maybe you should just let that Robert guy have us. James took a deep breath, guilt clawing at his chest. I wasn't saying I didn't want you here, he said carefully. I was scared. Scared that I'm not enough for you. That I can't give you what you need. Ava stared at him, her expression wavering between anger and something softer. Why would Mom pick you if you weren't good enough? James felt a lump rise in his throat. I don't know, he admitted. But I know she believed in me. And I want to believe in myself the way she did. For you and Liam. Ava didn't respond right away. She studied him for a long moment before finally nodding, just once. Then prove it, she said quietly. I will, James promised. As he left her room, he felt the weight of her words settle on him. Proving himself to Ava and Liam wouldn't be easy. But for the first time, he felt certain about one thing. He wasn't going to let them go without a fight. James had barely slept. The confrontation with Ava lingered in his mind, her words carving a sharp edge into his thoughts. Why would Mom pick you if you weren't good enough? It was a question that cut deeper than he wanted to admit. But it was also a challenge, one he couldn't ignore. The next morning, James sat in his office, staring at a stack of legal documents. Monica hovered nearby, her expression cautious. We need to decide how to proceed, she said softly. Fighting this will take time, resources, and well, it's not going to be easy. James looked up at her, his jaw set. Do whatever it takes. I'm not letting them go. For the first time, Monica's professional demeanor faltered, and she smiled. I'll make the calls. The decision wasn't without consequences. James knew the fight would draw public attention, something he had always worked to avoid. Adams Enterprises would face scrutiny, and his time and energy would be split between the company and the custody battle. But none of that mattered now. Ava and Liam weren't just an obligation anymore, they were family. The weeks leading up to the hearing were a blur of preparation. James met with his legal team daily, going over every detail of Charlotte's will and gathering evidence to prove his commitment to the twins. He also spent as much time as he could with Ava and Liam, knowing they needed reassurance more than ever. The twins, meanwhile, remained wary but began to show small signs of hope. Ava started asking questions about the case, her sharp mind picking apart the legal jargon James struggled to explain. Liam grew quieter, but he clung to James more often, seeking comfort in small gestures, a hand on his shoulder, a reassuring word. When the day of the hearing arrived, James felt a mix of nerves and determination. The courtroom was packed with reporters, lawyers, and a handful of onlookers. Robert Laney sat on the opposing side, his expression smug as he whispered to his attorney. James couldn't shake the sense that Robert's interest in the twins was less about family and more about opportunity. The hearing began with opening statements, each side presenting their case. Robert's lawyer painted him as a stable, family-oriented man with a direct blood connection to Ava and Liam. James, they argued, was a workaholic with no experience raising children, whose wealth didn't necessarily equate to being a good guardian. James's lawyer countered by emphasizing Charlotte's explicit wishes. They presented letters and character references from people who had witnessed James's efforts to care for the twins. They also highlighted Robert's lack of involvement in Charlotte's life, questioning his sudden interest in the children. The most difficult moment came when Robert himself took the stand. He spoke about his family values and how he believed the twins needed someone who understood their roots. He framed James as an outsider, someone who couldn't possibly connect with Ava and Liam the way he could. James clenched his fists, his frustration building as he listened. But when it was his turn to testify, he forced himself to remain calm. He took a deep breath before speaking. I won't stand here and pretend I'm perfect, he began, his voice steady but firm. When Ava and Liam came into my life, I didn't know what to do. I've spent most of my life building a business, and I never considered being a parent. But over the past few months, these kids have shown me something I never thought I'd find, what it means to truly care about someone. He glanced at Ava and Liam, who were sitting with a court-appointed advocate. Ava met his gaze, her expression unreadable, while Liam clutched a small stuffed dinosaur in his lap. Charlotte trusted me with her children, James continued. She believed in me even when I didn't believe in myself. And I'm not going to let her down. Ava and Liam are more than a responsibility to me. They're my family. When he stepped down, he caught a glimpse of Ava wiping her eyes discreetly, and Liam gave him a small, shaky smile. It was enough to remind him why he was doing this. The climax of the hearing came when the judge called Ava and Liam to speak. The twins had been given the choice to share their thoughts, and James had assured them they didn't have to. But Ava, always brave, had insisted. She stood in front of the court, her small frame dwarfed by the stand, but her voice was clear and unwavering. "We didn't know James at first," she said. "And we didn't think he wanted us. But he tried. Even when we made it hard for him, he kept trying." She glanced at James, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "My mom wouldn't have picked him if she didn't think he was the right person. And now, I think she was right." Liam followed, his voice quieter but no less heartfelt. "I miss my mom," he said simply. "But I feel safe with James. And I don't want to leave." James's chest tightened as he listened, a swell of emotion threatening to overwhelm him. He hadn't realized just how much their words would mean until he heard them. The judge took time to deliberate, the courtroom falling into a tense silence. James's lawyer whispered reassurances, but James could barely focus. All he could think about were Ava and Liam, their small hands clasped tightly together as they waited for their fate to be decided. When the judge finally returned, her decision was firm. She acknowledged the complexity of the case but emphasized the importance of honoring Charlotte's wishes and the bond that had developed between James and the twins. "I hereby award full custody of Ava and Liam Laney to Mr. James Adams," she concluded. The courtroom erupted in murmurs, but James barely heard them. Relief flooded through him as he turned to the twins, who ran to him without hesitation. He knelt down, wrapping them in a tight embrace, their tears mingling with his own. "You're stuck with me now," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Liam giggled through his tears, and Ava managed a small, teasing smile. "We'll see how long you can handle us," she said, but her tone was warm. For the first time in a long time, James felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. The air in the penthouse felt different now. Lighter. For months, it had been filled with tension and uncertainty, but since the judge's ruling, it felt like the weight of the world had lifted from James's shoulders. Ava and Liam were his, truly his, and the realization brought a mixture of relief, joy, and responsibility that he had never experienced before. Life didn't instantly transform into a picture-perfect story, but it shifted in meaningful ways. The routines they had tentatively begun to form before the hearing now felt natural. Breakfast together became a staple, with Liam's chatter filling the room and Ava occasionally cracking jokes that hinted at her growing comfort. James had started carving out real time for them. He blocked off his mornings for school drop-offs, leaving the office later than he ever had before. Evenings were dedicated to helping Ava with her art projects, or listening to Liam's endless stream of facts about prehistoric creatures. The workaholic in him bristled at first, but as the days passed, he began to realize he didn't mind stepping away from his desk. The spreadsheets and emails could wait. The twins, however, couldn't. One Saturday, James decided it was time for a proper celebration. He arranged a trip to a nearby lake house, a sprawling yet cozy retreat nestled against the water. He had been there only a handful of times before, always for corporate retreats or solitary weekends to recharge. But this time, he wanted the twins to see it as their space too, a place where they could make new memories together. The drive was long but pleasant, filled with Liam's excited questions about what they would do at the lake and Ava's half-hearted attempts to convince him to lower his voice. James couldn't help but smile as he listened, a warmth settling over him that had nothing to do with the summer sun streaming through the car windows. When they arrived, Liam bolted out of the car, racing toward the water's edge. Ava followed at a more measured pace, taking in the sprawling cabin, the dock stretching out into the lake, and the small rowboat tied up nearby. "This place is cool," she said, her tone nonchalant but her eyes wide with interest. "I thought you might like it," James replied. "It's ours now. We can come here any time." Ava turned to him, her lips curving into a rare, genuine smile. "Thanks." The weekend unfolded in a way James couldn't have anticipated. He taught Liam how to fish, though the boy was more interested in naming the minnows than actually catching anything. Ava spent hours sketching by the water, her pencil capturing the rippling waves and the towering pines. James joined her one afternoon, bringing a sketch pad of his own. His attempts at drawing were laughably bad, but Ava didn't tease him. Instead, she gave him tips, her voice soft and encouraging. That night, they sat around a fire pit roasting marshmallows. Liam's face was sticky with chocolate and melted marshmallow, and Ava was trying, unsuccessfully, not to laugh at him. "You've got a little something," she said, gesturing vaguely at his face. "Where?" Liam asked, wiping his cheek with his sleeve and smearing the mess even further. "Everywhere," Ava replied, doubling over with laughter. James chuckled, watching them. It was a simple moment, but it was everything. For the first time, he didn't feel like an outsider trying to fit into their lives. He felt like he belonged. As the fire crackled and the stars emerged overhead, Liam crawled into James's lap, his energy finally giving way to sleepiness. Ava sat close by, her sketchpad forgotten as she stared into the flames. "James?" she said quietly, her voice barely audible over the crackling fire. "Yeah?" he replied, his hand resting gently on Liam's back. Ava hesitated, her gaze flickering toward him before she spoke. "Do you ever think about Mom?" James's throat tightened. "Every day," he said honestly. "She was an incredible person." Ava nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I think she'd be okay with this," she said after a long pause. "With us being here. With you." Her words hit him with a wave of emotion. "I hope so," he said softly. "I'm trying to make her proud. And to make you proud too." Ava looked at him for a long moment, then gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "You're doing okay." James smiled, his heart swelling. Coming from Ava, that was the highest praise he could hope for. The next morning, they packed up and headed home, but the bond they had strengthened at the lake lingered. In the days and weeks that followed, the three of them fell into a rhythm that felt, for lack of a better word, like family. James still had his moments of doubt, but they were fewer now, overshadowed by the small victories that came with watching the twins thrive. One evening, as James was finishing up some paperwork in his office, Ava and Liam appeared in the doorway. Liam was clutching his stuffed dinosaur, his hair tousled from sleep, while Ava stood behind him, her arms crossed but her expression softer than usual. "What's up?" James asked, setting his pen down. "We just wanted to say goodnight," Liam said, shuffling into the room. He hesitated for a moment, then climbed into James's lap, wrapping his small arms around his neck. "Good night, Dad." James froze, his breath catching in his throat. He looked at Liam, then at Ava, who gave him a tiny, knowing smile. "Good night, Dad," she said, her voice quiet but steady. James swallowed hard, his arms tightening around Liam as a lump rose in his throat. He had faced countless challenges in his life, but nothing had prepared him for this moment. "Good night, guys," he managed, his voice thick with emotion. "I love you." For the first time, the words came easily, naturally. And as Ava and Liam left the room, James leaned back in his chair, a sense of peace washing over him. James stood at the kitchen counter early one Saturday morning, the soft hum of the coffee machine breaking the stillness. Sunlight streamed through the large windows, casting golden rays across the sleek countertops. He had grown to cherish these quiet moments before the chaos of the day began. From down the hall, he heard the unmistakable sound of Liam's excited footsteps, followed by Ava's groggy voice, half scolding him for being so loud. Moments later they appeared, Liam bounding into the kitchen with his stuffed dinosaur tucked under his arm, and Ava rubbing her eyes, her hair still a tangled mess. "Morning!" Liam chirped, climbing onto a stool at the island. "What's for breakfast?" "Pancakes," James said with a grin, pulling out a mixing bowl. "But you two are helping." Ava raised an eyebrow. "You cook now?" "I do when it's pancakes," James replied. "And I'm getting pretty good at it." Liam beamed and clambered down to help, while Ava joined him with a reluctant smile. Soon, the kitchen was filled with laughter and the sound of batter splattering onto the counter. Liam insisted on adding chocolate chips to every pancake, while Ava critiqued James's flipping technique. As they sat down to eat, syrup dripping from their plates and laughter echoing through the room, James felt a quiet sense of fulfillment. This wasn't the life he had planned, but it was the one he wouldn't trade for anything. "Best pancakes ever," Liam declared, his mouth full. "Not bad," Ava said, smirking. "For a beginner." James chuckled, shaking his head. "I'll take it." And in that moment, surrounded by sticky plates and happy faces, James knew he had finally found what he had been searching for all along. He had spent so much of his life chasing success, believing it would fill the emptiness inside him. But now, as he sat in the quiet of his office, he realized the truth. This was his greatest accomplishment. This was what mattered most. And for the first time in years, James Adams felt whole. James's journey from a cold, work-driven CEO to a devoted father shows us that family isn't just about biology. It's about showing up, trying your best, and being present when it matters most. Through love, trust, and perseverance, James discovered a part of himself he didn't know was missing, proving that even the most unexpected challenges can lead to the greatest rewards. This heartwarming story reminds us that growth often comes from the most unlikely places, and sometimes, the people who need us the most can teach us what truly matters in life. If you enjoyed this story of transformation and family, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel for more inspiring tales, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an upload. What did you think of James's journey? Let us know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.